Let me tell you about Rosa Castillo, 37 years old. National Sales Director at Mercer Home Goods, a mid-size housewares brand built on one promise: affordable quality. Delivered fast, every time. Rosa had spent 9 years making that promise real. She negotiated the supplier contracts, built the retailer relationships, personally closed the Target, Costco, and Home Goods accounts that represented 60% of Mercer's total revenue. What Gerald Mercer, founder, CEO, a man who believed nepotism was just keeping it in the family, didn't know when he replaced Rosa with his 28-year-old nephew Brandon was one detail he'd never bothered to learn in 9 years. Rosa's family owned the factory. Not a factory. The factory. Castillo Manufacturing, Guadalajara, Mexico. Founded by Rosa's grandfather in 1974. Currently run by her father Eduardo and her brother Miguel. The factory producing 70% of Mercer Home Goods' entire inventory. Every ceramic bowl, every stainless steel utensil set, every bamboo cutting board with a little Mercer logo burned into the corner. One building, one family, Rosa's family. And the morning Gerald called Rosa into his office and told her, with the particular confidence of a man who had never once faced real consequences, that Brandon would be taking the reins of the sales division because he needed room to grow. Rosa smiled, nodded politely, went back to her desk, and made one phone call to Guadalajara. This is the story of how one act of nepotism became the most expensive decision in Mercer Home Goods' 40-year history, and how a quiet woman from a manufacturing family taught a legacy CEO that loyalty runs in both directions. Or not at all. Buckle up. This twist was built in a factory. And it runs in the family. It started the way most betrayals do. Not with a scream. With a lunch invitation. Tuesday, 12:15 p.m. Gerald only used the executive dining room for 2 things: contract signings and firings. He wanted to dress up as conversations. Rosa had attended 4 of those lunches in 9 years. She had never been the guest of honor, until today. She arrived to find Gerald already seated, jacket off, sleeves rolled, doing the relaxed CEO performance he reserved for moments requiring the illusion of informality. Across from him sat Brandon Mercer, 28, easy smile. The confidence of someone who had never once been told no by anyone who mattered. Brandon had been at the company 11 months. He'd spent most of that time redecorating his office, attending trade shows, and posting content the company Instagram that Gerald called brilliant digital strategy and Rosa's team called product photos with bad lighting. Gerald talked for 11 minutes. Rosa counted, about vision, evolution, fresh perspectives, legacy versus innovation. Then he landed. We've decided to transition the sales director role to Brandon, effective end of the month. We'd love for you to stay on in an advisory capacity. Advisory, Rosa repeated. You still be part of the family, Gerald said warmly. Rosa looked at Brandon, who was arranging his napkin with the focus of a man who understood nothing about what was happening. What does advisory mean in terms of compensation and scope? Rosa asked. Gerald smiled. We can work all of that out. Because right now, Rosa said, I manage 14 people, $340 million in annual revenue relationships, and every supplier contract this company depends on. And you've done an incredible job, Gerald said. That's exactly why we want your wisdom. I'll think about it, Rosa said. She finished her water, thanked them for lunch, walked back to her office, closed the door, sat down, looked out the window for 90 seconds, then called her father in Guadalajara. Papa, she said. Mia, Eduardo said. How are you? They gave my job to Gerald's nephew, Rosa said. A long pause. Then Eduardo said, very quietly, should I call Miguel? Rosa looked out the window. Yes, she said. Call Miguel. Now, if you believe the most dangerous people in any room are the ones nobody thought to ask about, subscribe to Tangled Stories. I'm Brett. Around here, the quiet ones always have the longest receipts. Here is what Gerald Mercer did not know about Rosa Castillo. Not because she hid it, because he never asked. In 9 years, Gerald had never once asked where Rosa came from or why she had such an unusually strong relationship with the Castillo Manufacturing team in Guadalajara. He never considered they might share a last name. Rosa had joined Mercer to build something on her own terms, separate from the family business, separate from her father's legacy. She never hid the connection. It simply never came up. Mercer's procurement team managed the Castillo Manufacturing relationship and reported to the COO, not to Rosa. 2 separate departments, 2 separate worlds, 1 family. The Castillo Manufacturing contract was worth $34 million annually. Renewed 4 times. Always quietly, always reliably. Always because Eduardo Castillo trusted the company his daughter worked for. The contract had 60 days remaining before its next renewal window. Rosa had known that for months. Thursday morning. 2 days after the lunch. Rosa arrived to find an email outlining a 4-week handover plan, teach Brandon every account relationship, every supplier negotiation, every open deal in the pipeline. The advisory compensation, exactly 40% of her current salary. She read it twice, forwarded it to her personal email, then called Miguel. The transition plan landed, she said. What do you want to do? Miguel asked. Decline renewal, Rosa said. Standard notice. Clean, professional, no drama. Miguel was quiet. You know what that does to them. I know, Rosa said. You sure? Rosa thought about 9 years. About Brandon's lighting, about Gerald's smile, about 40% pay. I'm sure, she said. Don't do the handover, Miguel said quietly. Not until this is resolved. I wasn't planning to, Rosa said. The notice arrived Monday morning, on Castillo Manufacturing letterhead. Certified mail and email. Timestamped 8 a.m. Subject. Notice of non-renewal supply agreement #CM-2014-07. 3 paragraphs. No explanation. No negotiation opening. No drama. Cassandra Obi read it. Read it again. Walked directly to Gerald's office without knocking. Put the letter on his desk. Gerald read it. What is this? Castillo Manufacturing, Sandra said. They're not renewing. Call Eduardo. Gerald. Sandra's voice was careful. Castillo makes 70% of our inventory. If they don't renew, we cannot fulfill Target, Costco, or Home Goods. We have 4 months of existing stock before we start missing orders. Offer them more money, Gerald said. Whatever they want. Sandra called Eduardo. He was warm, polite, completely immovable. Our decision is final, Eduardo said. The notice speaks for itself. Sandra hung up. Walked back to Gerald's office. He won't negotiate, she said. Gerald frowned. We've worked together 14 years, what changed? Sandra looked at him for a long moment. Gerald, she said slowly. What's Rosa's last name? Gerald blinked. Castillo, he said. A pause. Then, very quietly, oh. Gerald called Rosa's cell at 11:42 a.m. She let it ring. He called again. She let it ring. At 2 p.m., he appeared at her office door. Rosa was on a real call with a home goods buyer and held up one finger without looking at him. Gerald waited. 11 minutes. Rosa finished, made a note, closed her laptop. Gerald, what can I do for you? Gerald closed the door. Sat down. Rosa, I got the notice from Castillo. Is that your family's company? Yes, Rosa said. Why didn't you? You never asked, Rosa said simply. Gerald tried again. I think we may have moved too fast on the transition. Gerald, Rosa's voice stayed professional, stayed warm. This is not about Brandon, Gerald blinked. This is about 9 years, Rosa said. 9 years of building relationships, closing accounts, and delivering results. And the conversation you chose to have about my future was over a lunch where the decision was already made. I'd like to make this right, Gerald said. I know you would, Rosa replied. But there's a difference between making something right and making something convenient. She slid a folder across the desk. Gerald opened it. Rosa's terms, written cleanly in bullet points. 1. Reinstatement as National Sales Director with full scope and authority. 2. Salary increase to $310,000, market rate for her role and her results. 3. A 3% equity stake reflecting her contribution to the company's growth. 4. Brandon reassigned to a role appropriate to his actual experience, with a genuine mentorship plan. 5. A written board acknowledgement that her role was handled inappropriately. 6. A 5-year contract with a termination clause requiring board approval and documented cause. Gerald's eyes stopped at the equity line. 3%, he said. My accounts represent 60% of your revenue, Rosa said. 3% is conservative. And Castillo Manufacturing? Gerald asked. Rosa's voice stayed even. My father makes his own decisions, she said. But he has worked with this company for 14 years because he trusted the people inside it. Gerald understood. Give me 48 hours, he said. Rosa nodded. You have them. Gerald spent those 48 hours learning what it felt like to have the floor disappear. Sandra walked him through the supply chain math. Without Castillo, 4 months of stock, then empty shelves. Then missed commitments. Then penalty clauses with Target and Costco worth $18 million. His lawyer read Rosa's terms and said, "Gerald, she negotiated a better deal than most of my clients get after litigation." He called Brandon. Brandon said, "Yeah, I didn't know her family owned the factory." "That's kind of crazy." Gerald looked at his nephew. "Brandon," he said quietly, "go back to digital marketing." Brandon blinked. "What?" "Please," Gerald said. "Just go back to digital marketing." On Wednesday afternoon, Gerald returned to Rosa's office. Folder, pen. 2 additions to her terms. A formal letter from all 5 board members acknowledging the transition was handled without proper process and that Rosa's contributions had not been appropriately recognized. And 1 line at the bottom of the equity agreement, in recognition of 9 years of service and the relationships that form the foundation of this company's success. Rosa read every word. She signed. Gerald signed. Neither made a speech. Rosa called Miguel that evening. "Done," she said. "How do you feel?" Miguel asked. Rosa looked around her office, the accounts, the team photos, the view she'd earned by showing up earlier and staying later than anyone else for 9 years. "Good," she said. "Tell Papa thank you," Miguel laughed softly. "He says the same to you." 1 week later, Castillo Manufacturing submitted a renewal notice for supply agreement #CM-2014-07, 5-year term. Same pricing, Eduardo Castillo's signature at the bottom. Sandra filed it in the system and slid a copy under Gerald's door without a word. Gerald found it at the end of the day. Read it, set it on his desk, and sat quietly with the specific irreversible education of a man who finally understood what he'd almost lost. Brandon was reassigned to brand partnerships, a real role, a junior one with a manager who would actually teach him something. He stopped redecorating his office. He started asking questions. He was, Rosa noticed 6 months later with genuine surprise, a decent student when someone invested in him properly. Rosa's team hit their annual target in 9 months instead of 12. The Costco account expanded. A new Williams-Sonoma partnership closed in Q3. And at the annual review dinner, Gerald stood up and said, without notes, that the most important thing he learned in 40 years was that loyalty is not a given, it is built. And it can leave through the same door it entered. He looked at Rosa when he said it. She raised her glass, small, controlled, the smile of someone who never needed to burn anything down. Because she had simply reminded the room of what was already true. And that, my friends, is how one quiet woman turned a nepotism lunch into a masterclass in leverage, without a lawsuit, without a leak, and without once raising her voice above professional. Because some people fight for their seat at the table. And some people already own the factory that made the table. Rosa knew which one she was. She just waited for Gerald to figure it out. If this story hit your justice receptors hard, do me a solid, subscribe to Tangled Stories, drop a like, and share this with anyone who's ever been passed over for someone who absolutely did not deserve it. Because here, every story has a twist. And sometimes that twist was manufactured in Guadalajara. I'm Brett, and I'll see you in the next one.